question I've got for you is what is kind of like sugar actually doing to us? And when people say sugar is making us fat, what's kind of the more accurate version of that claim?
It's an interesting and actually really quite complicated piece of sort of physiological chemistry or biochemistry. But what happens if you're a large dose of sugar more than you actually need, then that gets into the bloodstream very quickly. That not only gets into the bloodstream quickly, what it then does is it pokes your pancreas to produce a lot of insulin because your body doesn't like having a lot of sugar in the blood. I can save some of this for later. So the insulin stimulates your various sort of body tissues like muscle and so on to absorb all of this glucose. But if you're not working and exercising or being active, the muscles say, "Oh, I've got all this extra stuff. What do I do with it?" Well, the next thing the insulin does is helps the muscle turn it into fat. Now, the problem with that is that also applies to the liver, because what then happens is the liver gets the sugar and it gets deposited as fat in the liver, and this actually damages your liver's ability to help control your overall metabolism. Over and above that, any excess fat gets deposited in and around your sort of stomach and all the organs in your abdomen. It takes on a life of its own and it starts to excrete all sorts of nasty little hormones that contribute to this cycle, which becomes a vicious spiral that makes you fatter and fatter. So the real problem with sugar is the way in which it changes your metabolism. And eventually your own cells, your muscle cells, become resistant to the insulin. Put it somewhere else, will you? And the consequence of that is more and more of this fat ends up in the liver and in your abdomen, where it really doesn't do you any good at all. Um, so that's the real problem with sugar. But we're eating more sugar than we ever used to. If you go back 200 years, sugar was a rarity. Only the rich could afford it. And it's a curious fact that the rich tended to be rather overweight and fat, even in the 18th and 19th centuries. Um, and that's why the 19th century doctors could work out that sugar was the problem and starches were the problem. Because do you know how you make that lovely treat of pâté de foie gras,
I
which
do
is
not know.
basically, well, it's basically you take the liver of a goose, but it's a goose that's been force-fed corn, maize, and that's a high digestible starch to the goose. And all of that starch ends up as being deposited as fat in the goose's liver. And that's what makes the foie gras. You want to make pigs fat, you feed them high starch wheat. So it's not just the sugars, it's the carbohydrates, the easily digestible carbohydrates that are the problem.